The winter light cast long shadows across the snow-dusted walkway as Ethan Lane approached the imposing brownstone. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as he hesitated at the ornate door. This wasn't his world, these manicured hedges, these polished stone steps. The woman who opened the door mistook him for the maintenance staff, her eyes dismissive as she began to direct him toward the service entrance. Only when he mentioned his sister's name did her expression shift from indifference to embarrassment. Little did either of them know that this awkward case of mistaken identity would forever alter the course of 3 broken lives. Stay with us to witness an extraordinary journey of healing and connection. You won't believe the moment when a forgotten act of kindness returns in the most unexpected way, or how a child's silence speaks volumes about what truly matters. Sometimes the most profound beginnings start with a simple misunderstanding. 42 years had etched fine lines around Ethan Lane's eyes, lines that deepened when he smiled, which had been rare these past few months. 8 years a widower, he had mastered the art of moving forward, one careful step at a time, building a quiet life around his daughter Lily and his elementary school classroom. Teaching had been his anchor, his purpose, the place where his gentle patience transformed young lives. Then his mother had passed 3 months ago, a peaceful end after a long illness, but a loss that had reopened old wounds. The school had understood his need for space, granting him a semester's sabbatical to grieve and find his footing again. His 10-year-old daughter was staying with his sister Rebecca temporarily, giving him room to breathe through the hardest days. This morning he'd agreed to fill in for Rebecca as a favor, stepping into her role as caretaker for a child in one of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. It was a far cry from his modest apartment and the elementary school classroom where children's artwork brightened institutional walls. The woman at the door regarded him with cool blue eyes. "Mr. Lane? I was expecting Rebecca." "She's ill today. I'm her brother, Ethan." He offered his most reassuring smile, the one that had calmed countless anxious kindergartners. "I'm a certified elementary school teacher, currently on sabbatical." Claire Carter's posture remained perfect, controlled, as if any relaxation might cause something vital to crumble. Inside, the house was immaculate, beautiful but sterile, like a museum where life was exhibited rather than lived. In the kitchen, a small figure sat at the table, dark hair falling in neat braids against a pristine uniform. The girl didn't look up when they entered, her gaze fixed on an untouched bowl of cereal. "Lila, this is Mr. Lane. He'll be staying with you today instead of Miss Rebecca." Claire's voice softened when addressing her daughter, though the formality remained. Lila's eyes, the same penetrating blue as her mother's, flicked up briefly, then returned to her cereal. No smile, no greeting. Just a momentary acknowledgement of another adult passing through her world. In the days that followed, Ethan would learn what lay beneath the silent exterior of both mother and daughter, wounds that ran deeper than he could have imagined, and courage that would ultimately take his breath away. The first day with Lila passed in near complete silence. After Claire left for work, a sleek business card on the counter identifying her as CEO of Meridian Publishing, Ethan attempted various conversational approaches. He asked about her favorite books, suggested games, offered to explore the garden. Each overture was met with the same blank stare, or, at most, a non-committal shrug. By mid-morning, he changed tactics. Instead of trying to draw her out, he simply settled into the quiet alongside her. He found a book on the shelf and began to read silently. Occasionally, he would chuckle at a funny passage, or make a small sound of interest. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Lila watching him with cautious curiosity. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" he asked during their first real breakthrough moment. "I make a pretty mean hot chocolate, with tiny marshmallows, if your mom keeps them around." To his surprise, Lila nodded, a small gesture, but the first direct response he'd received. As he prepared their drinks, he hummed softly, an old lullaby he used to sing to his own daughter. The kitchen felt too perfect, too untouched. No drawings on the refrigerator, no evidence of family life beyond the expensive appliances and designer fixtures. "When my daughter Lily was about your age," he said conversationally as he placed a steaming mug before Lila, "she went through a phase where she only wanted to eat purple foods. Purple grapes, blueberries, which aren't actually purple, but she made an exception. Purple cabbage. I even made purple pancakes with food coloring once. A flicker of interest passed across Lila's face. She reached for the marshmallows he'd set aside, adding them one by one to her hot chocolate. When she took her first sip, a chocolate mustache formed on her upper lip. Ethan fought the urge to wipe it away, instead touching his own lip. I think you've got a little something. Lila's hand flew to her mouth. And then, so suddenly it startled them both, a small giggle escaped her. The sound was rusty, unpracticed, as if her laughter had been locked away for so long it had forgotten how to emerge. From the kitchen doorway came a sharp intake of breath. They turned to find Claire standing there, clutching her portfolio, her expression one of naked shock. Of Carter, Ethan stammered, rising. I didn't hear you come back. I forgot some documents. Her voice was strained as she stared at her daughter. Lila, did you just... The little girl's face closed off immediately, the brief moment of lightness vanishing like smoke. In the hallway, Claire gripped Ethan's arm with surprising strength. That's the first time she's laughed in over a year, she whispered, her professional composure cracking. Since her father died, she's barely spoken. The therapist said she'd come around in her own time, but... Her eyes sought his, suddenly vulnerable. What did you do? Nothing really, just talked to her. Made hot chocolate. Claire studied him with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. Are you sure we haven't met before? Before today? Ethan shook his head. I don't think so. I would remember. Something like disappointment flickered across Claire's face. Could you possibly come back tomorrow? I know it's not your regular job, but... Of course, Ethan found himself saying, though he hadn't planned to continue this temporary arrangement. If it helps Lila. What began as a one-day favor stretched into a week, then 2. Each day, Ethan arrived at 8 and left at 5, establishing a gentle routine with Lila. Mornings were for academics, reading, writing, and math activities disguised as games. Afternoons were for creativity, art projects, music, and explorations of the small garden behind the house. Though Lila remained largely silent, small changes emerged. She began to respond with nods or head shakes. She would reach for books she wanted to read or art supplies for projects she preferred. Once, when Ethan mentioned missing his own daughter, she patted his hand awkwardly, a gesture of comfort that nearly brought him to tears. Claire, too, began to soften around the edges. She started coming home earlier when possible, hovering at first on the periphery of their activities, then gradually joining in. One afternoon, she arrived to find them baking cookies, flour dusting the countertops of her immaculate kitchen, the air sweet with vanilla and chocolate. I should have asked permission, Ethan began apologetically, but Claire waved him off. It smells like... She paused, swallowing hard. It smells like a home. That evening, after Lila went to bed, Claire invited Ethan to stay for a glass of wine. As twilight deepened outside the tall windows, she revealed fragments of the story she normally kept locked away. Her husband James had died in a car accident 18 months ago. Lila had been in the car but escaped with minor physical injuries. The emotional wounds, however, had proven far more difficult to heal. She stopped speaking entirely about 6 months ago, Claire explained, her fingers tight around the stem of her wine glass. Right after we moved here from our old neighborhood. The therapists say it's selective mutism, a response to trauma. They keep telling me to be patient, but sometimes I wonder if I'll ever hear her voice again. She's still in there, Ethan assured her. Today she helped me choose which book to read. She has opinions, preferences. She's just found it safer not to express them out loud. How do you know so much about this? Claire asked, studying him over the rim of her glass. My wife died when our daughter was 3. Cancer. The words still caught in his throat even after 8 years. Lily stopped talking for a while too. Not as long as Lila, but long enough to terrify me. Children process grief differently than adults. Sometimes silence is the only response that makes sense to them. Something shifted in Claire's expression, recognition perhaps of a shared experience that transcended their obvious differences. I should go, Ethan said, rising. It's getting late. At the door, Claire hesitated. "There's something familiar about you," she said softly. "I can't shake the feeling that we've met before." Ethan smiled. "Maybe in another life." The breakthrough came during their third week together. Ethan had introduced Lila to an emotion journal, a simple notebook where she could draw pictures representing how she felt each day. Claire had been skeptical at first, she has a therapist for that sort of thing, but had relented when Ethan explained it wasn't therapy, just another form of communication. That afternoon, while Claire was at work, Lila fell while running in the garden. It wasn't serious, just a scraped knee, but the shock of the fall triggered something deeper. She began to cry, not the quiet tears Ethan had occasionally witnessed, but great, heaving sobs that seemed to come from the very core of her being. Ethan gathered her into his arms, rocking her gently as she cried. "It's okay, sweetheart. Let it out. I've got you." And then, in a voice raspy from disuse, Lila whispered, "It hurts." Ethan froze, afraid that any reaction might cause her to retreat again. "Your knee?" She shook her head against his chest. "Everything. I know," he murmured into her hair. "I know it does. Daddy's not coming back." "No, sweetheart, he's not. And Mommy's always sad." Ethan's heart constricted. "Your mom loves you very much. Sometimes grown-ups don't know how to show their feelings." "Like me?" Lila pulled back to look at him, her face tear-streaked but somehow lighter, as if speaking had released a terrible pressure. "Just like you," Ethan confirmed. "But you're talking now, and that's very brave." Lila considered this. "Can we call Mommy? To tell her?" When Claire arrived home 30 minutes later, her face was flushed from running up the front steps. She burst through the door, wild-eyed, having left an important board meeting, based on Ethan's cryptic text. "Come home when you can, something important has happened." "What is it? Is Lila okay?" The fear in her voice was palpable. From the living room, Lila's small voice called out, "Mommy, I made you a picture." Claire froze, her handbag slipping from her fingers to the floor with a thud. Slowly, as if moving through water, she turned toward the sound of her daughter's voice. Lila stood in the doorway, holding a piece of paper covered in colorful crayon scribbles. "It's us," she explained, "you and me and Mr. Ethan, in the garden." With a choked sob, Claire fell to her knees, opening her arms. Lila ran into them, and Claire held her daughter as if she might never let go, her body shaking with silent tears. And over Lila's head, Claire's eyes met Ethan's. In them, he saw gratitude so profound it bordered on reverence. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. That evening, after a celebratory dinner where Lila chattered with the pent-up energy of months of silence, Claire asked Ethan to join her on the patio. The night was cool but clear, stars visible even through the city's light pollution. "I need to show you something," she said, rising and disappearing into the house. When she returned, she carried a small wooden box, which she placed carefully on the table between them. "After James died, we moved across town. Lila started at a new school. She was struggling, not speaking much, but still functioning. One day, she came home with this." Claire opened the box and removed a letter, handling it as if it were infinitely precious. She handed it to Ethan. The paper was worn at the creases, obviously read many times. The handwriting was unmistakably his own. "Dear brave one, sometimes the world feels too big and too scary. Sometimes we lose people we love, and it hurts so much we think we might break into pieces. But you are stronger than you know. Your heart is like a lighthouse. Even when the storm rages, the light inside you keeps shining. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to not know what to feel. All your feelings are important, and they all deserve space to breathe. When you're ready, and only when you're ready, your voice will come back to you, and when it does, the world will be so happy to hear what you have to say. Until then, know that you are loved, you are seen, you are not alone. With care and belief in you. Mr. E. Ethan's hands trembled as recognition dawned. "I wrote this," he whispered. 2 years ago, there was a little girl at our school. We never knew her name. She'd lost someone and stopped speaking. The counselor mentioned it in the teacher's lounge. I wrote this letter and asked her to pass it along." "That was Lila," Claire said, her voice thick with emotion. "After James died, I enrolled her in a new school, hoping a fresh start would help. That letter? She carried it everywhere for months, slept with it under her pillow. It was the only thing that seemed to comfort her. I had no idea. When she transferred again after we moved here, the letter got lost in the shuffle. She was inconsolable. That's when she stopped speaking entirely." Claire wiped a tear from her cheek. "And then you walk into our home and she laughs for the first time in over a year, speaks for the first time in 6 months." "I never knew if the letter helped," Ethan admitted. "The counselor said the girl had transferred schools, and I always wondered—" "It helped," Claire said simply. "It was the kindest thing anyone did for her during that time." She reached across the table, covering his hand with her own. "For both of us." Something shifted between them in that moment. A recognition, a connection forged through a child's pain and healing. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 4 weeks into Ethan's time with the Carters. "Mr. Lane." The principal's voice was warm with familiarity. "I hope your sabbatical is going well. The reason I'm calling— there's been a development I thought you should know about." Ethan listened, his stomach tightening as Principal Morris explained. The school board had approved an unprecedented budget increase. All teachers would receive a substantial raise in the coming year, with additional funds for classroom supplies and professional development. "We'd love to have you back for the new term, Ethan. The children miss you, and frankly, no substitute has matched your connection with them. And with the new salary scale, well, it would solve a lot of problems for you and Lily, wouldn't it?" "It would." The financial struggles of single parenthood had been a constant undercurrent in Ethan's life. This raise would mean security, stability, a college fund for Lily that didn't require second jobs and constant worry. "Can I have some time to think about it?" he asked. "Of course, but we'll need your decision by Friday. Planning for the new term starts next week." After hanging up, Ethan stood at the window of his apartment, looking out at the city skyline. Returning to teaching had always been the plan. His sabbatical was temporary, a pause to grieve his mother and reset. The school, his colleagues, his students, they were the constants in his life. But now, the thought of leaving Leela and Claire created a physical ache in his chest. That afternoon, as they worked on a science project in the Carters' kitchen, Ethan found himself watching Leela with a mixture of pride and melancholy. In just 1 month, she had transformed from a silent, withdrawn child into this animated, curious girl who now peppered him with questions about everything from dinosaurs to distant galaxies. And Claire had begun to open up too, about her struggles as a single mother, about the crushing responsibility of running a company while raising a grieving child, about her own unprocessed pain over James's death. Somewhere along the way, their professional relationship had evolved into friendship, and perhaps, lately, into something more. "Mr. Ethan?" Lila's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You're not listening." "I'm sorry, sweetheart. What were you saying?" "I asked if we could go to the Science Museum tomorrow. They have a new dinosaur exhibit." "That sounds fun, but you should check with your mom first." "Check with me about what?" Claire appeared in the doorway, home earlier than usual. Her smile faded as she caught sight of Ethan's expression. "Is everything okay?" "Mommy, can we go to the Science Museum tomorrow, please?" Leela bounced in her seat. "Let me talk to Mr. Ethan first, okay? Why don't you go wash up before dinner?" Once Lila had left the room, Claire turned to Ethan. "What's wrong?" He hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I got a call from my principal today. They want me back for the new term, with a significant raise." "Oh." Claire's face went carefully blank. "When would you start?" "Planning begins next week. Classes the week after." "I see." She busied herself with removing her coat, hanging it with precise movements. "Well, that's wonderful news. Congratulations." "We always knew this was temporary," she said briskly, not meeting his eyes. "Lila's speaking again. She's made tremendous progress. She'll be fine." "Will you?" The words escaped before he could stop them. Claire stilled, her back to him. "Of course. We were managing before you came. We'll manage after you leave." The formality in her tone was like a physical barrier between them. This was the Claire he'd first met, controlled, remote, protecting herself from vulnerability. "I haven't given them an answer yet," he said. Now she turned, her expression softening slightly. "But you will. And you should. It's a good opportunity, Ethan. Stability for you and Lily." She was right, of course. The practical choice was clear. Yet as he drove home that night, the right decision had never felt so wrong. The next day passed in strained normalcy. Ethan and Lila worked on her reading skills in the morning, then baked cookies in the afternoon. When Claire came home, she maintained a careful distance, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. After Lila went to bed, Claire handed Ethan an envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "Your final payment plus a bonus for everything you've done for Lila." The businesslike transaction stung. "Claire, I didn't do this for money." "I know," her voice softened. "But I want to make sure you know how much we value what you've given us." "We, not I." "I should go," he said, suddenly needing to escape the suffocating formality between them. "Early day tomorrow." Claire nodded, maintaining a careful distance as she walked him to the door. "Will you come say goodbye to Lila tomorrow afternoon? Before you make your decision final?" "Of course." They stood awkwardly in the foyer, weeks of growing intimacy suddenly evaporated. "Ethan, Claire began, then stopped herself. "Thank you. For everything." He wanted to pull her into his arms, to tell her that the thought of leaving them was tearing him apart. Instead, he nodded stiffly and walked out into the night. At home, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, the envelope untouched before him. Inside lay financial security, an acknowledgement of services rendered, a clean break, the proper ending to a temporary arrangement. With a sudden surge of frustration, he pushed the envelope away and pulled out a sheet of paper. If he couldn't say what he needed to say in person, perhaps he could write it. Just as he had once written to an unknown little girl in pain. "Dear Claire, some people come into our lives for a reason, for a season, or for a lifetime. When I agreed to help Rebecca that first day, I thought you and Lila would be, for a reason, a brief encounter, a good deed, nothing more. I never expected you both to become so essential to my happiness, to rearrange the furniture of my heart to make space for yourselves. I never expected to find myself at this crossroads, torn between the safe, familiar path and the one that terrifies and exhilarates me in equal measure. The practical choice is clear. Return to my teaching position, accept the raise, provide stability for Lily. It's the responsible decision, the one that makes sense on paper. But paper can't capture the way my heart lifts when Lila masters a new concept, or the peace I feel sitting with you on the patio after she's gone to bed. It can't measure what I would be leaving behind. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if there's a place for me in your lives beyond these borrowed weeks. But I do know that walking away feels like leaving home rather than returning to it. Whatever I decide tomorrow, please know this. You and Lila have healed parts of me I thought would stay broken forever. For that alone, I will always be grateful. With care, Ethan." He read it over, then carefully folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. Whether he would actually give it to her, he didn't know. Friday morning dawned gray and rainy, matching Ethan's mood. He called Principal Morris and asked for an extension on his decision, just until the end of the day. Then he drove to the Carter's house for what might be the last time. Lila greeted him with her usual enthusiasm, oblivious to the undercurrents between the adults. Claire had already left for work, leaving a note about being home early for their farewell dinner. The day passed both too quickly and too slowly. Ethan found himself treasuring every moment with Lila, mentally cataloging her expressions, her questions, the sound of her laughter. By afternoon, a leaden weight had settled in his chest. At 4 o'clock, as they were cleaning up from their art project, the doorbell rang. Ethan opened it to find a courier holding a large, flat package. Delivery for Ethan Lane? Puzzled, Ethan signed for the package and brought it inside. "Let's see what this is, shall we?" he said to Lila, who was watching curiously. The package contained a framed letter, his letter, to Brave One from 2 years ago. But now it was mounted alongside a new edition, a child's drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. Underneath, in Claire's elegant handwriting, were the words. To the man who gave my daughter back her laughter and showed me how to find mine again. Ethan stared at it, his vision blurring. Mommy and I made it, Lila said proudly. Do you like it? I love it, he managed, his voice thick. Mommy said we should give it to you to remember us, but I told her you don't need to remember us if you stay. Lila looked up at him, her blue eyes suddenly serious. Are you going away? Mr. Ethan. Owen Stanley. Before he could answer, the front door opened and Claire appeared, looking windblown and slightly frantic. I'm sorry I'm late, she said breathlessly. The meeting ran over and then traffic was... She stopped abruptly, noticing the framed letter in Ethan's hands. Oh, you got it. Ethan looked from the frame to Claire, his heart hammering in his chest. It's beautiful. Is Mr. Ethan leaving us, Mommy? Lila's voice was small but direct, the question hanging in the air between them. Claire knelt to her daughter's level. Mr. Ethan has his own job, sweetheart. His school needs him back. But we need him too, Lila insisted, her lower lip trembling. Lila, why don't you go up to your room for a little while? Claire suggested gently. Mr. Ethan and I need to talk. Grown-up stuff. You're going to make him leave, Lila accused, tears welling in her eyes. No one is making anyone do anything, Ethan interjected, setting down the frame and kneeling beside Claire. This is just a conversation, okay? Reluctantly, Lila trudged upstairs, glancing back at them with worry etched across her small features. When they were alone, Claire turned to him, her professional composure cracking. I'm sorry about the frame, Lila insisted. I should have asked if it would make things more difficult for you. It's not difficult, Ethan said softly. It's perfect. Claire's eyes searched his. You have to make your decision today, don't you? Yes. And you're going back to the school. It wasn't a question, but a statement of what she believed to be inevitable. Ethan hesitated. That was the plan. Something in his tone made Claire look up sharply. What? He took a deep breath. I wrote you a letter last night, after I left. He pulled the envelope from his pocket. It probably doesn't make any sense. It's just what I couldn't say out loud. Claire took the envelope with trembling fingers. May I? Ethan nodded, his throat suddenly dry. She read it once, then again, her expression shifting from uncertainty to something softer, more vulnerable. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. She stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. I don't want to be the reason you give up security, a career you love. What if there's something I might love more? The words hung between them, fragile and enormous. Claire stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her blue eyes. When James died, I thought that was it. One chance at happiness, gone. I built walls around Lila and myself, kept us safe, kept us functional. Her voice wavered. Then you walked through our door, and everything changed. Let me finish, she said, her voice strengthening. I'm not good at this, at being vulnerable, at letting people in, but these past weeks, watching you with Leela, feeling myself come alive again. She drew a shaky breath. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. Ethan's heart soared. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you're considering an alternative to going back to your school, if you're thinking about staying... Claire faltered, then reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope of her own. I wrote something to... She handed it to him, her fingers lingering against his. Read it, please. Ethan opened the envelope, unfolding a single sheet of cream-colored stationery. Dear Ethan, there are practical reasons why you should take the teaching position. Security, stability, a return to the familiar. I respect those reasons. I would never ask you to set them aside lightly. But there are also reasons, less practical perhaps, but no less real, why the thought of you leaving creates a hollow space inside me that I'm not sure I can fill again. When James died, I thought I understood grief. What I didn't understand was how to live with it. How to be both a grieving widow and a present mother. Both a capable CEO and a vulnerable woman. I built a life of careful compartments, never allowing myself to fully inhabit any single one for fear the others might collapse. You changed that. You showed Lila how to express her feelings when words failed her. You showed me how to be present even when it hurts. You created a space where healing could happen, not through grand gestures, but through hot chocolate with too many marshmallows, through paper snowflakes on kitchen tables, through the simple act of bearing witness to our pain without trying to fix it. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if what I'm feeling is real or just gratitude magnified by circumstance. But I do know this. When you're here, our house feels like a home again. When you're here, I remember how to breathe. Would you stay? Not just for her, for me too. Claire. Ethan looked up from the letter, his heart full to bursting. Yes, he said simply. Yes, Claire's voice was barely audible. Yes, I'll stay. He moved toward her, closing the distance between them. I'll need to call the principal, make arrangements for Lily to join us here sometimes. Figure out what I'll do for work, maybe private tutoring or... Claire silenced him with a finger to his lips. We'll figure it out, together. And then she was in his arms, her face tilted up to his, her eyes asking a question his heart had already answered. When their lips met, it felt like coming home after a long journey, familiar and new all at once. They broke apart at the sound of a small gasp from the stairway. Lila stood watching them, her eyes wide with wonder. Does this mean Mr. Ethan is staying? She asks, hope making her voice tremble. Claire held out her hand, inviting her daughter to join them. Would you like that? Lila didn't answer with words. Instead, she ran to them, flinging herself into their embrace with such force that they all nearly toppled over. Ethan lifted her up, and the three of them stood in a circle of arms, of shared breath, of tentative new beginnings. You were never just temporary, Claire whispered against his shoulder. Outside, the rain had stopped, and late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, painting everything in golden light. In that moment, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that he had found his way home. Not to a place, but to these two people who had somehow become essential to him. 6 months later, the brownstone had transformed. Where once there had been sterile perfection, there was now joyful evidence of life being lived. Lila's artwork covered the refrigerator. Books and games spilled from shelves that had previously displayed only carefully curated objects. The garden behind the house bloomed with wildflowers that Lila had insisted on planting. Because they're free, like us now. Ethan had started a small tutoring service, working with children who, like Lila, needed more personalized attention than traditional classrooms could provide. His daughter, Lily, spent weekends and school holidays with them, forming a surprising bond with Lila, despite their age difference. Claire had restructured her work schedule, delegating more to be present for family dinners and weekend adventures. The rigid compartments of her life had given way to a more fluid existence where CEO and mother, grieving widow and new partner, could coexist without threatening each other. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Claire found Ethan on the patio, staring up at the stars. "Any for your thoughts," she said, settling beside him. "Just thinking about how life works out sometimes," he replied, drawing her close. "How the worst days can lead to the best ones. How temporary arrangements can become permanent." Claire smiled against his shoulder. "When you walked through our door that first day, did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" "Not in my wildest dreams," Ethan admitted, "but now I can't imagine being anywhere else." On the anniversary of their first meeting, Claire presented Ethan with a small, leather-bound book. Inside, she had collected memories from their months together. Lila's drawings, photographs, notes they had written to each other. The final page held a letter, penned in her elegant hand. "Dear Ethan, 1 year ago you walked through our door as a substitute, a temporary solution to a practical problem. You were supposed to be here for a day. Instead, you became our forever. Before you, grief was something Lila and I carried alone, in separate silences. You taught us how to share it, how to honor it without being defined by it. You showed us that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means growing around the wound until it becomes part of our strength rather than our weakness. Every day, I watch you build this family we've created. Not through grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but through 1,000 small moments of patience and presence. The way you listened to Lila's endless questions. The way you've welcomed Lily into our home as if she's always belonged here. The way you remember that I need coffee before conversation in the morning and silence before sleep at night. They say family isn't just blood, it's who loves you enough to choose you every single day. Thank you for choosing us, for showing us that healing isn't a destination, but a journey we take together, one step at a time. Oh, my love? Claire. Ethan read the letter twice, then looked up to find Claire watching him, her eyes soft in the lamplight. I've been thinking, she said, taking his hand, about making this official. Not because we need papers or ceremonies to be a family, but because I want the world to know what we already do, that we belong to each other now. Ethan's heart swelled. Are you proposing to me, Miss Carter? Claire smiled, the full, unguarded smile that still took his breath away. I believe I am, Mr. Lane. Instead of answering with words, Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Great minds think alike, he said softly as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a sapphire, the color of her eyes, of Lila's eyes, of the summer sky above them. Claire's laughter mingled with her tears as they exchanged rings right there in the living room, with no witnesses but the home they had built together. Later that night, as Claire slept beside him, Ethan lay awake thinking about the strange, winding path that had led him here. The grief that had never fully left him but had changed shape, making room for new joy. The temporary arrangement that had become his forever. The letter to an unknown child that had somehow found its way back to him, bringing healing not just to its recipient, but to its author as well. On his nightstand sat the framed letter that had started everything, now surrounded by family photos. Lila and Lily making cookies together, Claire laughing in the garden, the four of them at the beach last summer. Beside it lay the leather-bound memory book, open to Claire's letter, her words a testament to the family they had created from the broken pieces of their separate lives. Family isn't just blood. It's who loves you enough to choose you every single day. In the quiet darkness, Ethan made the same choice he had been making every day for the past year. He chose them, Claire with her hard-won vulnerability, Lily with her resilient spirit, Lily with her generous heart. He chose this life they were building together, not despite its imperfections, but because of them. Because real love, like real healing, happens in the messy, beautiful, ordinary moments of choosing each other again and again, when there is every reason to turn away but one compelling reason to stay. The knowledge that some temporary arrangements are always meant to be permanent. Morning light filtered through the curtains as Ethan woke to find Lila standing beside the bed, clutching her stuffed elephant. Dad, she whispered, testing out the name she had only recently begun to use. Can I show you something? Careful not to wake Claire, Ethan slipped out of bed and followed Lila to her room. On her desk lay an open notebook, her emotion journal, the one they had started together all those months ago. She flipped to the latest entry, a colorful drawing of 4 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. It's us, she explained, pointing to each figure in turn. You and Mom and me and Lily, and look. She turned to the first page where dark scribbles had once represented her sadness. I was so small then, in my feelings. You've grown, Ethan agreed, marveling at the contrast between those early dark pages and the vibrant illustrations that filled the book now. Lila nodded solemnly. You know what I think? I think Dad is watching us from heaven, and he sent you to us because he knew we needed someone to help us remember how to be happy. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. What do you think about that? About having 2 dads, one in heaven and one here, with you? Lila considered this with the clear-eyed wisdom that sometimes startled him. I think I'm lucky, she said finally. Some kids don't even have one dad who loves them, and I have 2. As they stood there in the early morning light, Ethan realized that this moment of quiet understanding with a child who had once been silent with grief, was the true miracle. Not the grand romantic gestures or the life-changing decisions, but the small, sacred moments of connection that healed them all, one heartbeat at a time. Later that day, as the four of them planted flowers in the garden, Claire and Ethan working side by side while Lily helped Lila carefully pat soil around delicate seedlings, Ethan thought about all the families that existed in the world. Some bound by blood, others by choice. Some finding each other through chance encounters, others through years of shared history. All of them imperfect, all of them precious in their own way. He thought about the letter that had traveled across time and space to bring them together, about how a simple act of kindness, offered to a stranger in pain, had returned to him multiplied beyond measure, about how sometimes the most profound beginnings start with a simple misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity, a temporary arrangement, a substitute stepping in for just one day. As if sensing his thoughts, Claire looked up from her planting, soil smudged across her cheek in a way that would have horrified the polished CEO he'd met a year ago. She smiled at him, a private smile full of promise and memory. And in that moment, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Not because fate had decreed it, but because they had all chosen it, day after day, through grief and joy, through silence and words, through the letters they kept and the love they built together. Have you ever been misunderstood only to find that the misconception led to something beautiful? Or perhaps you've experienced how healing can come from the most unexpected sources: a stranger's kindness, a child's wisdom, a letter written from the heart. Maybe you've discovered that family isn't always defined by blood, but by who stays beside you when the world feels too big and too scary. Remember Ethan and Claire's story when you face your own crossroads between the practical choice and the one your heart whispers to make. Remember Lila's journey from silence to speech, from darkness to light. Remember that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means growing around the wound until it becomes part of your strength rather than your weakness. And most of all, remember that sometimes the most profound connections begin with what seems like a temporary arrangement. A substitute stepping in for just one day. A letter written to an unknown child. A helping hand extended without expectation of return. Because in the end, family isn't just blood. It's who loves you enough to choose you every single day. The rain hammered against the pavement like countless tiny fists, drowning out most sounds at the darkened harbor that night, but not the scream. Trevor Lewis's head snapped up from his mop when he heard it. A woman's voice, terror-stricken, coming from the shadows between warehouses. Without hesitation, he dropped his cleaning equipment and ran toward the sound, his years of military training kicking in instinctively. By morning, instead of being celebrated for saving a life, Trevor found himself unemployed, holding a termination notice with still bandaged hands. But what the young woman he rescued did next would change everything, proving that sometimes justice finds its way through the most unexpected channels. Stay with us for the remarkable story of how one act of courage led to a wave of change, how justice was restored, and how a seemingly anonymous janitor became a living symbol of kindness and integrity in a world that had almost forgotten what true heroism looks like. Trevor Lewis moved through life with a disciplined quietness that had served him well during his 8 years in the military. Now, at 42, he applied that same precision to his modest work as a night janitor at the harbor facilities, finding dignity in clean floors and emptied trash bins that few would notice or appreciate. His weathered face rarely broke into full smiles except in the presence of his 7-year-old daughter, Emma. She was his universe. The reason he worked nights, so he could be there when she returned from school, help with homework, and tuck her in before heading to his shift. Since his wife's death 3 years ago, Trevor had reconstructed his life around one purpose: giving Emma stability and love. He spoke little about his military past, preferring to read bedtime stories about brave knights and honorable warriors rather than share his own experiences. What mattered wasn't who he had been, but who he was for Emma now. "Dad, why do you work when everyone else is sleeping?" Emma had asked once. "So I can be awake when you are," he'd answered simply, running his hand through her sandy blonde hair. "That's all that matters." Each morning after his shift, Trevor would walk 6 blocks to save the bus fare, arriving home just in time to make Emma breakfast before school. Mrs. Calloway, an elderly neighbor, would watch Emma in the evenings until Trevor's shift began. The system wasn't perfect, but it worked. A balance of minimum wage, careful budgeting, and precious hours with his daughter. The harbor at 2 in the morning was Trevor's domain, a world of shadows and echoes where he moved methodically through his cleaning routine. The April rain had been relentless that night, creating rivers between the warehouses and loading bays. Trevor had just finished mopping the main corridor when the sound cut through the drumming of rain. A woman's scream, sharp with terror. His body responded before his mind could process it. Dropping his mop, he sprinted toward the sound, heart pounding against his ribs. As he rounded the corner of Warehouse 7, he saw them. 2 men, cornering a young woman against the building's wall. One had his hand over her mouth, the other was reaching for her purse. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked onto Trevor's. "Hey!" Trevor's voice boomed with authority he hadn't used since leaving the service. Both men turned, momentarily startled. What followed was brief but violent. The larger attacker lunged at Trevor with a knife, slashing his forearm before Trevor could disarm him with a practiced move. The second man fled immediately. Trevor subdued the knife wielder with minimal force, keeping him pinned until the woman could call the police on her phone. "Are you hurt?" Trevor asked the trembling woman, who shook her head, eyes filled with shock and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "They would have." She couldn't finish the sentence. By the time police arrived, Trevor had already wrapped his bleeding arm with a handkerchief. He gave his statement briefly, declining medical attention despite the officer's insistence. He needed to finish his shift. Emma's asthma medication refill was due tomorrow, and he couldn't afford to miss work. "You should get that looked at," the officer said, eyeing Trevor's makeshift bandage. "It's fine," Trevor replied. "I've had worse." He returned to his abandoned mop, finished his shift as if nothing had happened, and clocked out at 7 a.m. with the same quiet efficiency that characterized everything he did. Trevor arrived at work the following evening to find his supervisor, Phil, waiting with an envelope. The company's decision was regrettable but necessary. Termination, effective immediately. "You abandon your assigned area," Phil explained, unable to meet Trevor's eyes. "Engaged in unauthorized intervention, company liability, clear violation of protocol." Trevor stood silently, his bandaged arm throbbing beneath his jacket sleeve. "I need to finish this week," he finally said, his voice steady. "My daughter's medication—" "Final pay is included," Phil cut in, sliding the envelope forward. "I'm sorry, Lewis, my hands are tied." Trevor didn't argue. He never did. He simply took the envelope, nodded once, and walked out into the night, his mind calculating how long they could stretch the final paycheck, which bills could wait, which couldn't. At home, Trevor sat at their small kitchen table, staring at the train tickets he'd been saving for Emma's birthday trip. His daughter slept peacefully in the next room, unaware that everything had changed. He buried his face in his hands, allowing himself a rare moment of despair. "I don't know what I'll do now," he whispered to the empty kitchen. A knock at the door startled him. Outside stood a young woman in an expensive coat, hair perfectly styled despite the continuing rain. It took him a moment to recognize her. "Mr. Lewis?" she asked. "I'm the woman you saved last night. May I come in?" Her name was Madeline Grant, she explained, standing in his modest living room with the poise of someone accustomed to much grander spaces. "I wanted to thank you personally," she said. "The police told me where to find you." Trevor nodded uncomfortably. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she replied firmly, "they wouldn't have. Most people would have walked away, called security perhaps if their conscience bothered them enough." She glanced around the apartment, noting Emma's school photos and the medicine bottles on the counter. "How is your arm?" "It's fine," Trevor said automatically. "Just a scratch." Madeline's eyes narrowed. "The police told me you were injured while saving me. I insisted they give me your information." She paused. "They also mentioned you were working at the time. I called the harbor management this morning to commend you." Her expression darkened. "That's when I learned what they did." Trevor looked away. "It's company policy. I left my post." "You left your post to save my life?" Madeline's voice was steel beneath silk. "And they fired you for it." She pulled out a business card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. "I'm the communications director for Westlake Industries, and Senator Grant's daughter." Trevor stared at the card, uncomprehending. "My father," she continued, "has been fighting for better protection for workers who act in emergency situations, and I've spent my career highlighting corporate injustice." She looked him directly in the eyes. "Mr. Lewis, would you allow me to tell your story?" "I can't accept charity," Trevor said firmly the next morning, as Madeline sat across from him at a local diner. Emma was at school, and Trevor had reluctantly agreed to meet after Madeline's persistent calls. "This isn't charity," Madeline replied, sliding her tablet across the table. On the screen was a draft press release. "This is justice, and a chance to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to others." Trevor scanned the document, uncomfortable with seeing himself described as a hero and former military veteran. He'd always preferred anonymity, finding safety in being overlooked. "My father has been trying to pass worker protection legislation for years," Madeline explained. "Your story could make the difference, put a human face on the issue." "Why do you care so much?" Trevor asked directly. "This happens to people every day." Madeline's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Because I know what it's like when systems fail people who deserve better." She hesitated. "My mother was a nurse who lost her job after reporting safety violations. She never found equivalent work again." She straightened her shoulders. "Will you help me, Mr. Lewis? Not for yourself, but for others who might face the same situation." Trevor thought of Emma, of the values he was trying to teach her, standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. He nodded slowly. "Tell me what you need me to do." 3 days later, Trevor stood uncomfortably in a suit borrowed from Madeline's brother, just off stage at a hotel conference room packed with journalists. Emma sat beside him, swinging her legs nervously, her best dress carefully ironed that morning. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" she whispered, sensing his tension. Trevor wasn't sure at all, but he nodded anyway. "Sometimes we have to speak up, even when it's hard." On stage, Madeline was commanding, her voice clear and passionate as she recounted the events of that rainy night. "Rick saved me," she said, gesturing toward where Trevor waited. "Then they fired him. Is this the world we want to live in, where doing the right thing comes with punishment, where corporate policy values property over people, where a single father loses his livelihood because he chose to help someone in danger?" Cameras flashed as Trevor was invited on stage, Emma's small hand clutched in his. He spoke briefly, simply, about his military service, his life as a single father, and his belief in helping others. "I don't regret what I did," he concluded. "I'd do it again tomorrow. We all should be able to help each other without fear of consequences." By evening, Trevor's story was trending nationwide. Security footage from the harbor showing his rescue had been released, playing on every news channel. The phrase "the quiet warrior" appeared in headlines, with thousands sharing their own stories of corporate injustice. A photo of Emma hugging her father at the press conference became the movement's unofficial emblem, a child's pure pride in her father's courage, resonating across political lines. Opinion pieces appeared with titles like "The Janitor Who Cleaned Up Our Conscience" and "When Systems Punish Heroes." Within 48 hours, harbor management issued a public statement re-evaluating our emergency response protocols. By the third day, competitors were publicly announcing their own policy changes, eager to avoid similar publicity nightmares. Trevor watched the unfolding events with disbelief from the hotel suite Madeline's team had arranged. "I'd never wanted this attention," he told her, as they watched another news segment about his military service. "Sometimes the attention finds the person who's been avoiding it," Madeline replied. "Because they're exactly who needs to be seen." Emma, curled up beside her father on the hotel sofa, looked up at him. "Mrs. Calloway said you're famous now," she said. "Are we rich?" Trevor laughed softly. "No, sweetheart. We're just the same people we were before." But they weren't. Not really. Something fundamental had shifted, not just in public perception, but in Trevor himself. For years he had kept his head down, believing invisibility was safety. Now he was visible, and with that visibility came an unexpected power. The letter arrived by courier on the 5th day. Harbor Management's formal apology, offer of reinstatement with back pay, and a newly created position as Safety Coordination Supervisor with significantly higher salary. Trevor read it twice, then set it aside. When Madeline called to ask about his decision, his answer was immediate. "I won't go back to a place that only values doing the right thing after public pressure," he said. Those values were missing when it mattered. "Good," Madeline replied, surprising him, "because I have something better in mind. My father wants to meet you." Senator James Grant's office projected power without ostentation, much like the man himself. He rose to greet Trevor with a firm handshake and genuine warmth in his eyes. "Mr. Lewis," the senator said, "my daughter tells me you're exactly the man I've been looking for." The senator explained his Veterans Advocacy Program, designed to support military personnel transitioning to civilian life. What they lacked was a director who understood both worlds authentically. "Someone who's lived it," Senator Grant said. "Someone who's faced the challenges firsthand and still maintained their integrity." Trevor glanced at Madeline, who nodded encouragingly. "Sir, I'm just a janitor," Trevor said carefully. "No," the senator replied. "You're a man of principle, who was doing janitorial work. There's a profound difference." Over the next week, as the media attention continued to build, Trevor found himself at the center of a growing movement. Worker protection bills suddenly gained new sponsors in 3 states. Harbor Management's stock dropped 11 points. Trevor's former supervisor gave an anonymous interview expressing regret over the company's. The national morning show interview wasn't Trevor's idea, but Emma's excitement at seeing a real TV studio overrode his reluctance. The host was respectful, asking about his new role helping veterans find meaningful employment and the legislation now moving through committee. "They're calling you the quiet warrior online," the host noted. "How does that feel?" Trevor thought for a moment. "I've known real warriors," he said. "They don't do what they do for recognition. They do it because it's right. There are millions of people making those choices every day. We just don't hear their stories. But now we're hearing yours," the host pointed out. "Yes," Trevor agreed. "And maybe that's the point. Maybe we need these reminders that ordinary people still care about each other." The show's producers had prepared a surprise, a montage of people who had been inspired by Trevor's story. A teenage girl who had organized a protest when her school tried to fire a beloved teacher. A bus driver who had stopped to help an elderly man who had fallen despite running behind schedule. A nurse who had reported safety violations despite threats to her job. Trevor watched in stunned silence, then looked directly into the camera. "I'm not special," he said. "I just did what most people would do if they weren't afraid of the consequences. That's what needs to change. The fear." That evening, as he tucked Emma into bed in their temporary apartment, she looked up at him with shining eyes. "Jamie at school said you're famous now," she said. "She said her mom showed her your interview." "I'm not famous," Trevor assured her. "Just doing a different kind of work now." Emma shook her head with the certainty of childhood. "My dad's the man people read about in storybooks," she declared. "The ones who do brave things, even when it's hard." For the first time since that rainy night, Trevor felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. Not because of the attention or the job offer, but because his daughter had seen him stand for something that mattered. 6 months later, Trevor stood in the doorway of their new home, a modest but comfortable house with a backyard where Emma could play. His work with the Veterans Program had given him purpose beyond anything he'd expected, connecting soldiers with companies that valued their skills and dedication. Most precious of all was time, being home when Emma returned from school, attending her soccer games, helping with science projects. The dark circles under his eyes had faded, the permanent tension in his shoulders had eased. The Worker Protection Act, informally known as the Lewis Law, passed with bipartisan support 4 months after Trevor's story went public. Harbor Management had become the unlikely leader in a new corporate responsibility movement, their reformed policies setting industry standards. Trevor's old apartment building now housed a community center for at-risk youth and veterans, funded partly by corporate donations and partly by community fundraising. Mrs. Calloway still visited regularly, bringing her apple pies and fussing over Emma as if nothing had changed. But things had changed, not just for Trevor and Emma, but for thousands of others whose stories would never make headlines, but whose lives were protected by new safeguards. Madeline became a regular visitor, bringing books she thought Emma might enjoy. Her friendship had evolved naturally, beyond her initial advocacy. "You changed my perspective," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch while Emma played in the yard. "I was effective at my job, but sometimes disconnected from the people behind the stories." Trevor nodded. "And you showed me that sometimes staying quiet isn't the same as staying true to yourself." The annual Veterans Service Gala was Trevor's first formal event as program director. He stood awkwardly in his new suit, watching attendees mingle beneath crystal chandeliers. Madeline appeared at his side, elegant in a simple blue dress. "Nervous?" "Terrified," he admitted, with a small smile. "I'm more comfortable behind the scenes." "Sometimes the most important voices are the ones that had to be convinced to speak," she replied. As Trevor stepped to the podium to give his remarks, he saw Emma in the front row, beaming with pride. Beside her sat Madeline and Senator Grant, the unlikely allies who had helped reshape his world. "Sometimes the world forgets its heroes," Trevor began, "until one voice speaks up to remind us all." He looked directly at his daughter as he concluded. "Doing the right thing needs no justification beyond the heart that guides you. That's the legacy I hope to pass on, not just to my daughter, but to every veteran finding their way home." As applause filled the room, Emma rushed forward with a small bouquet of flowers. Trevor lifted her into his arms, his quiet warrior's heart finally at peace. 1 year after that rainy night at the harbor, Trevor and Emma stood at the dedication of a new community center for veterans and their families. The plaque bore no names, just a simple inscription: "For those who serve others before themselves." Emma, now 8, had grown an inch and gained a confidence that sometimes startled her father. She tugged at his hand as the ceremony concluded. "Dad," she whispered, "are you still a hero now that everything's normal again?" Trevor knelt to her level, seeing in her eyes the same question he had asked himself many times. "Heroism isn't about what you do when everyone's watching," he said quietly. "It's about what you do when no one is." Emma considered this, then nodded. "Like when you still help Mrs. Calloway with her groceries even though you're busy?" "Exactly like that," he said, smiling. Behind them, the community they had helped build continued to grow, not because of one dramatic rescue on a rainy night, but because of 1,000 small acts of kindness that followed, rippling outward from that single moment when one man refused to look away. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that justice still exists in unexpected places, and that sometimes the quietest among us can change the game through simple courage and unwavering integrity. Because in a world that often celebrates the loudest voices, it's the silent warriors who truly transform lives. One principled action at a time. The rain hammered against the pavement like countless tiny fists, drowning out most sounds at the darkened harbor that night. But not the scream. Trevor Lewis's head snapped up from his mop when he heard it, a woman's voice, terror-stricken, coming from the shadows between warehouses. Without hesitation, he dropped his cleaning equipment and ran toward the sound, his years of military training kicking in instinctively. By morning, instead of being celebrated for saving a life, Trevor found himself unemployed, holding a termination notice with still bandaged hands. But what the young woman he rescued did next would change everything, proving that sometimes justice finds its way through the most unexpected channels. Stay with us for the remarkable story of how one act of courage led to a wave of change, how justice was restored, and how a seemingly anonymous janitor became a living symbol of kindness and integrity in a world that had almost forgotten what true heroism looks like. Trevor Lewis moved through life with the disciplined quietness that had served him well during his 8 years in the military. Now, at 42, he applied that same precision to his modest work as a night janitor at the harbor facilities, finding dignity in clean floors and empty trash bins that few would notice or appreciate. His weathered face rarely broke into full smiles except in the presence of his 7-year-old daughter, Emma. She was his universe, the reason he worked nights so he could be there when she returned from school, help with homework, and tuck her in before heading to his shift. Since his wife's death 3 years ago, Trevor had reconstructed his life around one purpose: giving Emma stability and love. He spoke little about his military past, preferring to read bedtime stories about brave knights and honorable warriors rather than share his own experiences. What mattered wasn't who he had been, but who he was for Emma now. "Dad, why do you work when everyone else is sleeping?" Emma had asked once. "So I can be awake when you are," he'd answered simply, running his hand through her sandy blonde hair. "That's all that matters." Each morning after his shift, Trevor would walk 6 blocks to save the bus fare, arriving home just in time to make Emma breakfast before school. Mrs. Calloway, an elderly neighbor, would watch Emma in the evenings until Trevor's shift began. The system wasn't perfect, but it worked. A balance of minimum wage, careful budgeting, and precious hours with his daughter. The harbor at 2 in the morning was Trevor's domain, a world of shadows and echoes where he moved methodically through his cleaning routine. The April rain had been relentless that night, creating rivers between the warehouses and loading bays. Trevor had just finished mopping the main corridor when the sound cut through the drumming of rain, a woman's scream, sharp with terror. His body responded before his mind could process it. Dropping his mop, he sprinted toward the sound, heart pounding against his ribs. As he rounded the corner of Warehouse 7, he saw them. 2 men cornering a young woman against the building's wall. One had his hand over her mouth. The other was reaching for her purse. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked onto Trevor's. "Hey!" Trevor's voice boomed with authority he hadn't used since leaving the service. Both men turned, momentarily startled. What followed was brief but violent. The larger attacker lunged at Trevor with a knife, slashing his forearm before Trevor could disarm him with a practiced move. The second man fled, immediately. Trevor subdued the knife wielder with minimal force, keeping him pinned until the woman could call the police on her phone. "Are you hurt?" Trevor asked the trembling woman, who shook her head, eyes filled with shock and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "They would have—" She couldn't finish the sentence. By the time police arrived, Trevor had already wrapped his bleeding arm with a handkerchief. He gave his statement briefly, declining medical attention despite the officer's insistence. He needed to finish his shift. Emma's asthma medication refill was due tomorrow, and he couldn't afford to miss work. "You should get that looked at," the officer said, eyeing Trevor's makeshift bandage. "It's fine," Trevor replied. "I've had worse." He returned to his abandoned mop, finished his shift as if nothing had happened, and clocked out at 7 a.m. with the same quiet efficiency that characterized everything he did. Trevor arrived at work the following evening to find his supervisor, Phil, waiting with an envelope. The company's decision was regrettable but necessary: termination, effective immediately. "You abandoned your assigned area," Phil explained, unable to meet Trevor's eyes. "Engaged in unauthorized intervention, company liability, clear violation of protocol." Trevor stood silently, his bandaged arm throbbing beneath his jacket sleeve. "I need to finish this week," he finally said, his voice steady. "My daughter's medication." "Final pay is included," Phil cut in, sliding the envelope forward. "I'm sorry, Lewis, my hands are tied." Trevor didn't argue. He never did. He simply took the envelope, nodded,